And so we thought that you would enjoy hearing from Doug directly and have the opportunity to ask questions. So you do have a presentation.
While she's finding that, I can tell you a little bit about myself. I started this position in September of 2015 after the legislature created it in the legislative session in 2015. And I'll kind of get into a little bit more about why that happened. Prior to that, I worked in the legislature for a number of senators over about 18 years and worked on a wide variety of issues, including criminal justice, juvenile justice, things like that. One of the great things that I believe about the legislature is that you can dabble or get involved in so many different issues and during your time there. And sometimes you get involved in things that you didn't even know that were of interest of you. I always think back to Senator Jim Jensen, who came in as a contractor to the legislature. By the time he left, he was chairing the Health and Human Services Committee and was a reformer of the behavioral health system. And I know that when Senator Jensen started out, he had no interest in that system or anything. By the end, that was his passion. So that's something along the way that you'll see. But all right, corrections is kind of. And if you have any questions along the way, just let me know. Corrections kind of really in the prison system really jumped to the forefront in the public eye and in the legislative eye back in 2014. And when the legislature adopted a resolution to create a study committee during the interim that really focused on the Nico Jenkins situation. Mr. Jenkins had been in the Nebraska prison system for a number of years, and before he was let out, he was talking about how he was going to get out and kill people. And the short version is he said he was going to do that. There were people that were trying to intervene, trying to figure out what they could do to keep him from getting out, whether he needed to go to the regional center or something along those lines. Well, the bottom line is he got out and then he went out and killed 4 people in Omaha. So the legislature created this special investigative committee to look at that situation. But I staffed that committee. As we moved along in a very short period of time, we realized there were a lot of different issues that were going on with the Department of Corrections, including you had restrictive housing issues, you had the early release of inmates that was taking place outside of the law, really. Mental health treatment was not where it needed to be. Sentences were being miscalculated. There's a whole series of things that happened. And as a result, that committee, there was a number of senators on there. They made a lot of findings and recommendations. One of the things they did was decide that we needed to have an Office of Inspector General for Corrections. And that ended up being me. And I was in the room when it happened, when they talked about doing it. They've already done something like that with the child welfare system. The Inspector General for Child Welfare, Julie Rogers, she's been doing that job for a number of years now. And Senator Rigby is one of the people that she reports to as the chair of the Health Committee. And so I was in the room. They said, we need to make an Inspector General like we did for child welfare. And one of the people I worked with said, well, that'd be a great job for Doug. And I said, no. Everybody turned and looked at me. I'm like, no. So the next legislative session, they went ahead and passed the law to create the office. I had moved on to a different senator and was involved in lots of different things. I wasn't involved in any kind of criminal justice. Scoot that one. Okay. Had been involved in a lot of different issues, and but not in the criminal justice. Didn't even really look at that bill, and they passed it. And somebody came to me and said, "You should apply for that." And I said, "No, I don't. No, I have no interest." And they came back again and said, "You should really think about that." I'm like, no. That's okay. And finally they said, why don't you want to apply for that? And I said, well, I don't like going into prisons. And they said, well, nobody really does. And I said, oh, that's a good point. So I applied for it and I got the job. And now I go into prisons all the time. It's like, hey, what's going on? The one day I was sitting in a this falls apart. I was out at the Lincoln Correctional Center, and there's a guy who's in for first-degree murder. And I'm talking, there's like the cell door, and I'm kind of squatted down because there's a little space that you can talk through. And I'm talking to him, Juan Castaneda. I'm saying, hey, Mr. Castaneda, how you doing? And I was doing that, and I realized, wow, like 3 years ago, I hated going into prisons, but here I am now. So anyway, the LR 424 committee made a whole bunch of recommendations. There was work that was done after that. The legislature the next year extended that by adopting legislative resolution 34. Another group of senators continue to work on it. Again, they passed another resolution in 2017 to extend that work. Last year, the committee went out and toured all the prisons. They had a public hearing. They issued a new report, and they're planning to do additional work this summer and the fall as well. So priorities of the work of these committees have included such issues as prison population concerns, staffing concerns, restrictive housing issues, and staff and inmate safety concerns. And those are a couple of the things that I'm really going to focus on today. Give you a little bit more background though. The Council of State Governments, which is a national group comprised of legislative members, the governors are represented. Basically, they represent a lot of all state government, all three. They came into the state, and Nebraska's governor, the Supreme Court, and the legislature all welcomed them and asked them if they would help us out with slowing our prison population growth. And if you could do that, you could also reduce correction spending and reinvest a portion of that savings back into strategies that would reduce recidivism and increase public safety. So Council of State Governments comes in 2015, they completed their first phase. And what they did was they did a comprehensive data and policy analysis. And they went in and looked at every bit of the system, of the criminal justice system. They collected a lot of information, talked to all the key players and everything. So they ended up coming back with some recommendations. The legislature then passed Legislative Bill 605. And with the goal being that was going to change some things as far as sentencing and oversight and a variety of things. But the goal was to reduce the prison population by 1,000 people and also enhance supervision and do a lot of different things like that. But really the number one goal in that was to get our prison population down. And I'll have a chart here in a few minutes that'll show you why we need to do that. So far, that hasn't paid off. What's happened is our population has kind of plateaued. It was kind of doing this thing, it's plateaued, but it really hasn't come down like expected. They did a second phase that was completed in 2017, and I have a link on there when you get this PowerPoint that you can find a lot more information about the work of the Council of State Governments in that latest report. A couple of the key things that they found in 2017, that admissions and releases within the correctional system were relatively flat. The goal was that there would be fewer people admitted into the prison system and there would be more people released. So that really hasn't taken place. Crimes and arrests have been down since 2011, but violent crimes increased from 2013 to 2016. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon. And then from 2015 to 2017, there was a 21% increase in felony court cases. So even though crimes really and arrests were down, there were an increase in felonies taking place and going through the court process, in which maybe then that has led to, instead of that admissions going down, that's why it maybe has plateaued a bit. Paroles people getting paroled has gone up slightly the last couple of years, which is good. One of the things to think about with prison populations that you have people coming in on the front end, you have people leaving on the back end, and there's lots of stuff that goes on in between. So there's lots of different factors on why our prison population is so high. The population, a little more historical information for you, but the population of our state correctional system grew quite a bit back in the 1980s and 1990s and exceeded the design capacity of the facilities within the system. I'll explain a little bit more about design capacity, but that basically is what those facilities were designed to hold at the time that they were created. As a result, the legislature in 1997 did provide funding for two new facilities. One was the Tecumseh prison, which is a maximum custody prison that holds about 1,000 people. And then the other thing they established was the work ethic camp in McCut. And that was originally designed to be run by the probation system and have people that were kind of in between going to corrections and being on probation. Eventually that was expanded and became part of the correctional system. Before it was probation kind of running it with a little help from corrections, but then now it really is all about corrections. It has a few hundred people in it. The legislature also created a community corrections council, and that brought all the key people together in the system. You're talking the courts, we had judges on it, there's parole, probation, legislatures, other citizens, members of the legislature, the Department of Corrections, And they've met for a number of years and did a lot of the groundwork that kind of helped bring down the population or ease it a little bit. And the crisis was temporarily averted, really, when you looked at population growth. So it kind of stabilized, and we became a less crowded system in a way. But then that changed when there was more kind of those tough on crime sentences were changed, and then there were also a decrease in correctional programs due to budget cuts. And so people were not getting prepared for release and then not getting released by the parole board. So you had an increase of people coming in and a decrease of people leaving the system. In the recent years, you can see how in 2012, our system had about 4,600 inmates, and that really spiked up there until toward the end of 2014, we had almost 5,400 people in our correction system. So almost about a 750 inmate population increase. Now, then we had some of the work of council state governments and kind of more attention being paid to it. It really, as you can see, it did really kind of plateau. Originally, it was projected to get up here to around 5,700 and everything. And if we had 5,700 or more inmates in our correctional system, now that would be quite the challenge. It's already a challenge, but that would be a different challenge. So here we go. When you look at design capacity, currently Nebraska's correctional system is at 157% of design capacity. We're the 5th most overcrowded state prison system. Like I said, it was projected to hit 170% here coming up in 2020. It looks like we're going to stay below that, which is important. The Bureau of Justice Statistics defines design capacity as the number of inmates that planners or architects intended for the facility. Somebody the other day was meeting with some school kids, and they were talking about design capacity. And I said, you know, maybe the best way to describe that is when you talk to the kids is if you have a classroom that has 20 kids in it, you have your classroom, it's the correct size for 20 kids, you have one teacher. Well, let's just throw another 20 desks in there. Now you're gonna have 40 kids, but you're still gonna have the one teacher. You might only have 20 books though, and you still only gonna have like one bathroom, is that? And for all those kids, you might have just one gym. I mean, the whole school was built for those small, like half the size of what you ended up going to. And that's kind of the way it ends up with the correction system. The Omaha Correctional Center is a minimum custody facility, and that's at 196%. I can tell you, when I first got this job and I went over to the OCC, I walked into a cell and I look and there's 8 guys in there, and I'm like, whoa, I didn't expect to see 8 of you in there. Well, it was designed to have 4, but also now you have bunk beds and everything, and you have 8 guys. And so then that whole living unit has double the people that it was originally intended to have. So you have problems with the showers, you have problems with the bathroom, the open area where people congregate. Now it's very crowded and tight and everything. Your classroom space, we're gonna teach classes or teach programs to people. We're designed to maybe have, you know, to serve 500 people. Now you have 1,000 people that are trying to use that space. You go into a gym, and it's incredibly crowded in there. So guys that want to get out and do some recreation or work out or just get some of that stress relieved, it makes it harder for them to do that. The Diagnostic and Evaluation Center here in Lincoln, which is the first step for male inmates when they come into the system, where they come in and have some assessments done and figure out where they need to go and what level they are. They have minimum custody, maximum custody, etc. That's 285% of capacity. If you go into the living units in there, they don't even have enough beds in the living units for the guys. And what happens is they kind of look like those plastic toboggans, and then they have a little mattress in them. And at night, they have a stack of those, and they take them and they put them out on the floor, and people sleep on the floor there. That can be a problem when you have an incident that takes place. Last year, some guys decided they wanted to attack some staff and start fires in one of the units at the Diagnostic and Evaluation Center. And what happened then was guys were told to get back to their cell. Well, you had like a dozen guys that didn't have a cell to go to. And other people went and locked down in their cell, but you still had 12 guys that were kind of hanging out there because they didn't have a place to go. So then the staff thinks, instead of 3 guys instigating everything, oh my God, we got 15 guys that are involved in this, and it became very chaotic, and it was quite a concern for the staff there. The state penitentiary here in Lincoln, our oldest facility, that's at about 186% of capacity. There's almost 1,400 people. Actually, I have the number in here, but I believe it's about almost 1,400 people are in the state pen. We have a combination of minimum custody and maximum custody inmates in there. And then the work ethic camp out there in McCook is at 175% capacity. And like I kind of described before, expanding prison capacity is not as simple as just adding beds. When you can add beds to some extent, but then it starts impacting the rest of the facility. Right now, Nebraska's cost per offender is over $38,000 per year. It's important to know about design capacity in the prison population, because right now there's a state law that says the governor shall order an overcrowding emergency if the system is at 140% of design capacity on July 1st, 2020. This law was first passed back in, I believe, 2002, and it was introduced to say that if the design capacity was at 140%, the governor would have to call for that overcrowding emergency. But the legislature, working with the governor at the time, they changed it from a shall to a may, and said the governor may declare that overcrowding emergency. And the thought behind this legislation was that if we're beyond 140%, because we weren't there at that time, the governor would declare this emergency, and they could figure out how to move some of those people out and lessen the stress on the system. But because they changed it to May, the governor has never declared that overcrowding emergency. The legislature decided a few years ago that they needed to change that and kind of put a date out there that, hey, if we're not at this 140% by July 1, 2020, we really do need to do something. I mean, we've had a couple riots at the council. There's lots of different incidents that take place because of our overcrowded system. Plus, the thought was, with the work with the council state governments, that we would actually be down below that point by 2020. At this point, it does not look like we will be at 140% by 2020. If we aren't, at that point, inmates are to be released until the system reaches 125% of design capacity. And what that will entail is the parole board will be identifying suitable candidates for parole, trying to figure out which ones are the most likely to succeed and to be the least risk in the community. To give you an idea of how many people would have to be released, to get to 140% right now, you'd have to release 577 inmates. But to get to 125%, you'd have to release over 1,000 inmates. A lot of times, I think policymakers and other people that are looking at this overcrowding emergency act, they focus on it 140%, but it's important to know that it actually calls for you to go down to 125%. So 1,000 inmates right now would have to be released if the governor, and the governor could declare an overcrowding emergency today if you want. In 2016, I do annual reports and a lot of other different reports. Myself and the Legislative Resolution 34 Special Committee recommended that the Parole Administration and the Board of Parole and the Department of Corrections develop a plan that would share how they would actually implement this overcrowding emergency. They didn't act on that, but now they will do that and issue a report no later than November 1st of this year, because the law was passed by the legislature this session that requires them to do that. That will give you guys and everybody else a better idea of what this overcrowding emergency will look like and how it will be carried out.
Doug, what's the time frame that if you declared that, what time frame would 1,083 prisoners have to be released?
That's a good question. The law doesn't really say, but you have to start making some progress. So there's some latitude as far as the releases and everything, but it doesn't actually say. So they could start just gradually taking their time and work down. And I think the intent is that you don't have to release 1,000 like that. We could take our time and move some people out slowly but surely and get down to that number.
Is that a process? Is that an ongoing process to identify those possible inmates to be released at any time that happens?
Well, there's always a system where people are getting assessed and being put up for parole hearings, and things like that. So they kind of have an idea of who would be good candidates, but at this report that'll come out later this year, what they've said is they're really going to do a much better job of showing everybody exactly how they will go about doing that. I'm looking forward to that report. I think that will be really helpful for the legislature and the governor. One of the factors that also, I just thought I'd throw this up here. One of the things, there's so many factors that go into the overcrowding situation. Right now, when I come into the system, if I get sentenced to like a 10 to 20 year sentence, I actually will serve between 5 and 10 years, depending on my behavior. I mean, I can serve up to 10 to 20, but if I come in and I'm a well-behaved inmate and everything, I get something called good time. So it's kind of like, if it was a 10-year sentence, I get 5 years of good time. But one of the things that happens is I misbehave, they start taking away my good time. And there's an incentive for me to behave because, hey, instead of the 10 years, and the judges and everybody knows this is part of the system, that this is how it works. But I get sentenced to 10, but I know if I behave myself, which is good for the people around me and the system, I'll get out in 5 years. In the last few years, the Department of Corrections has taken away, they've gone from taking away 191 years of good time. Right now, we're projected to take over 650 years of good time. So you have people that are staying in longer because of that. This is just one of the factors that impacts that, but this is something that recently I came across and highlighted to legislators. Because at the same time, you can get good time restored. Like if I lose some good time, but then I kind of get my act together and they say, well, okay, Doug's doing better, we're going to give him some of that good time back. The good time being restored has been cut in half. So we have that number going up and the other number going down. And so this impacts the overcrowding of the system as well. There's a number of reasons why good time has been taken away. We've had, like I said, we've had a couple riots, we've got lots of incidents going on. You have a system that is a lot of stress in it right now. You have a lot of inmates that are acting out. And this is one way to try to provide incentives for them, like, hey, you're not behaving, we're taking away your good time, cracking down on you and everything. The other big part of the system, kind of the crisis that the Department of Corrections is facing, is staffing. The department has faced staffing issues for a number of years. However, there are currently very serious staffing issues at both the Tecumseh Prison and the Nebraska State Penitentiary. Other prisons have, they have some issues with staffing, but those are the two big ones. And those are the most important parts of the system because they have about 2,500 guys in them, and a lot of those are maximum custody individuals who are in there for a variety of reasons and are thought to be kind of a high risk. So those are our two facilities that we have a really tough time at getting staff at. I started this job, like I said, in the fall of 2015, and one of the things I did was send out a staff survey kind of late 2015, early 2016, and then I did another one in 2017 to get an idea of what the staff were thinking and what they're feeling. In 2017, I found that only 40% felt that they were safe in their job. 20%, only 20% would recommend a corrections job to a friend or a family member. Only 29% were satisfied with their employment. 23% believed their fellow employees were being held accountable for poor behavior. Only 17% believed the department was going in a positive direction, which was a decrease from my survey from the year before. And I had to make sure to put a question in there about the legislature too. And it's less than 7% believed the legislature was actually concerned about correctional employees. And so that's kind of an interesting one. It actually went up just slightly, I think, over 2016, maybe a couple points. But one of the things with staff shortages, or many of the things with staff shortages, are you get increases in overtime. When I go out to Tecumseh or the state pen or other places, I ask staff, like, how many hours are you putting in each week? What's your average? And a lot of them, those frontline security staff, I mean, they're putting on average 55, 60 hours a week right now, especially at Tecumseh in the state pen. Then they get kind of, you can see they get wore down. They get, they have a decrease in their morale. More people leave because of that. And if you have a family and everything, it makes it very difficult when you know that when you go into work, they might hold you over for another 4 or 8 hours, and you might have a kid's ball game or you got to pick up your kid from school or whatever. You have things like that going on. It causes a lot of stress on family. I've talked to a lot of staff that, I mean, who just open up and tell me the impact that this is having on their family life. One night I was down at Tecumseh about 10 o'clock, and I mean, I had 2 staff sitting there talking to me about how they'd gone through forces because of the staff and the stress on that. They love what they did, but it just made it so hard and impacted their family in such a negative way. And then as people leave, that results in more overtime. You have new people coming in the system, so you have inexperienced staff, inexperienced leaders, because people get promoted. And then the inmates are treated in an inconsistent manner because you have all this new blood coming in, and that creates friction and everything else between the staff and the inmate population. So staffing is a very important part of the issues facing the Department of Corrections. This is an interesting chart that I track on a regular basis. If you look at overtime hours for the protective services workers, which are those frontline staff that work in the prisons, we went from under 20,000 hours of overtime in a month, which is a lot anyway, and now it's peaked up to over 40,000. You can see when the first riot at Tecumseh took place, they really had to do a lot of overtime, and it really spiked up, and then it kind of came down. It still hadn't got down to that lower level, but then has continued to climb, but it kind of goes up and down and everything, but it just, that trend line is not where you want it to be. The turnover rate for those frontline people has gone from 18% in 2010 to 34% last year. So almost double in that 7-8 year period. And then I gave the same type of presentation in 2016 for Open Sky. And I thought I went back and grabbed that slide, and here's kind of the issues that I put in 2016. Those are in black, and what I found now. Overcrowding continues as we await the impact of LB 605. This is 2 years ago. Well, hasn't been much of an impact other than plateauing, and so it's essentially the same. There are about 350 beds that have been or will be added to the system, so that will help with overcrowding. The legislature funded 100 beds at the Community Corrections Center in Lincoln for men. And that cost it was about $1.8 million. It's just kind of a big dorm out on the front of the facility. So that helped ease some of the burden there a little bit. In about January, there's another 150 beds that are going to come online out at the Community Corrections Center in Lincoln for women. So that'll be good. Unfortunately, we don't really have the demand for that many women in community corrections. So we'll see how that goes. And then the legislature this year passed funding for another 100 beds at the Nebraska State Pen for minimum custody inmates. The problem is that we don't have the staff right now to staff the units at the pen in the right way. So adding another 100 bed unit, by the time that comes online, hopefully with the staffing issues resolved, but we'll see. Protective services staffing issues, I put back then we're at Tecumseh in the State Pen, that's the same. Health services and treatment staff, that was an issue with nurses, licensed mental health practitioners, and psychologists. That's the same, except for psychologists and psychiatrists. The department has done an incredible job of hiring and filling positions for psychologists and psychiatrists. They have a new medical director that's come in. He did the same job over time. He's done an incredible job. Programming has increased slightly, so that's positive. They need to have flexibility to move people around within the system, but we haven't added any beds, and we don't have the population going down, so that's the same. The riot in Tecumseh in 2015, back then I said, well, things were getting back to normal, but that is good. Well, we had a second riot that took place, and recently some staff told me that they feel that the circumstances are very similar to back in 2015. The legislature did provide funding for some expansion of community corrections bed and community corrections beds and other issues. Director Frakes from the department has indicated he will ask for additional resources in this next budget. And then the reentry grant program, which was something the legislature created to help out with people getting on the outside and providing better outcomes for people leaving. That started in 2015. We're at that program's continuing on. It's been very successful. There's probably a need to expand that program according to the Department of Corrections. In 2018, we've seen a significant increase in the use of restrictive housing, which is when people are put in kind of segregation where they're in their cells for 23 hours a day because of behaviors taking place. There's been a significant increase in the loss of good time, like I showed before. I think the State Pen is more of a concern than even Tecumseh. I'd be shocked if there isn't some significant event there this year. There's been a lot of little things that have happened where the staff, this is not me talk to them really as much as the staff there, and what they tell me is that every time there's some little thing that pops up there, they think, is this the day that something bad where it's going to blow up? And then there's this thing called the new normal, where you kind of get used to that overtime being really high, and you get used to being so overcrowded and everything, and you just keep operating, and you don't even realize what life was really like 5 years ago, because you just keep going through this thing where it just gradually gets worse all the time, and you don't realize how much better things were. I pointed out to Director Frakes, I think last fall, that I found some minutes from a warden's meeting back in about 2012, where the warden at the Tecumseh said, hey, we have 14 staff vacancies right now, but we're going to make it. We're going to be okay. They have over 100 right now. So, and then one of the things too is that the department started making these new quarterly data sheets that we have for you. And every quarter they put that out, and they worked with the legislature to put really good information in there about population, about programming and other things in there. And you can find those online on their website. And that's been very helpful, I think, for people. So that's the end of my very fast, throwing a lot of information at your presentation, and I'd be willing to answer any questions you have.
Are other states in the same boat, or are we the extreme?
As far as the overcrowding, we're kind of on the extreme. There's only a few states that have a more overcrowded system than us, and with the exception of one of those haven't been trending down. Ours, until just recently, kind of was trending up. So we're kind of the opposite from a lot of state correctional systems on the overcrowding. Staffing is kind of all over the board. Some states have no staffing problems. Other states have very similar staffing problems.
A quick follow-up question. The cost to build a new prison for 1,000 inmates would be?
Hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know, probably $300 million.
How much?
About 300 million, probably. It all depends on the. I mean, right now they spend on just doing 150 or 160 beds for women at the Community Corrections Center, which is very low key, kind of not high security housing and everything. That was over $20 million. And to add 100 beds out of minimum custody at the state pen, just to build the unit, is going to run about $6 million. It's very expensive.
First of all, I'd like to compliment you on the information. Obviously, well thought out.
I don't live and breathe it.
One of the questions that I had is, and I have two, there was a 16 FTE shortage at the diagnostics of psychologists, I believe. Have they made any progress in that? Because that seems to be one of the things that's holding up pardons, holding up kind of what I call institutional constipation, where things just can't move through the process. Have they made any gains in it?
Great progress on that.
Have they? Okay.
Pretty much have those positions filled.
The other question I have comes from my interest in health services and the mental health side of it is, it's been stated, correctly, if I'm not right here, that about 39% of the inmates struggle or deal with mental illness issues. And I've read some recently where places are, the question is do we need to bring back the regional centers to some degree, as opposed to new prisons, but regional mental health centers? They were supposed to get funded with community mental health center. That got out to the community, but the funding didn't fall, actually.
I mean, I think in Nebraska and every other state, the largest mental health facility in each state would be a prison. Prisons, I mean, we're loaded up with a lot of people with mental health conditions and mental illness. The department has tried to work more with the regional centers to see if there's some way that they can take some of the men that they have or women in their system that really do need that higher level of psychiatric care, like a regional center, to see if they can access those services. So far, they haven't had any success in moving them over there, but there are a number of people when you go out. They have at the Lincoln Correctional Center, they have 2 units just specifically for mental health. They have a mental health unit and then a secure mental health unit. The secure mental health unit is guys who are very dangerous to themselves or others, and they're pretty much locked down all the time and everything. But
2 sessions ago, Senator from Hastings had an interest in revitalizing the Hastings Center. And my concern is not just the staffing issue, but the professional staff. He contended that we could get staff to move to Hastings. And I'm not picking on Hastings. I'm just saying it's not easy. It's not easy to get the necessary healthcare professionals outside of Lincoln Hall. That's an urban view from a farm kids.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge on a lot of places across the state. Even until recently, just even Lincoln at all, how we were having problems, like you said, with psychologists and psychiatrists.
Thank you.
Why, when you're talking about $38,000 per inmate, why don't we revisit the past to talk about prison farms, prison dairies, and so forth, so that to some level they can be self-sustaining with inmate labor? Now, what precludes that from happening?
That's a good question. I mean, over the years, you have seen a lot of things like that. There's been this change and everything, but I think there's a guy here in Lincoln that actually is an international consultant on corrections, and he goes over to Europe and other places and stuff. And one of the things he brought to me was, why don't we create like kind of a smaller prison of like little houses, really, where the guys actually build their own houses, and they learn that skill and then they can sell. We can sell those houses, but they can set it up, and then it'd be more for guys that are kind of on the lower custody guys and everything. And maybe guys who are on their way out at some point, so they can learn these construction skills. But he has this whole plan, and the cost to do it, and have a couple hundred guys living in that would be pretty minimal according to him, and it's consistent with what's been done in other countries. So it's kind of outside the box. It's kind of difficult, I think, for a lot of state correctional agencies to think like that. But I think it's something that needs to be looked at.
A number of years ago, three of us created a program out here south West Lincoln for training rescue dogs and training them. We brought in the professional trainers to train the inmates. We saved nearly 240 dogs from being euthanized. But the big impact was the calming of the general population when they had something to do. Now, we also, and one of my colleagues, and we did it out of our own wallet, so it wasn't state funded. One of my colleagues said, why don't we get an agricultural training program? Let's get these guys ready to go back into society. But the big blocking agent was a warden.
I know that
now, aren't they capable of thinking about these guys maybe going back into society and having a way to earn a wage?
I think there's been kind of a renewed emphasis on developing programs in the department to do more vocational training, things like that. But they do need some extra funding for it, because they've kind of taken away over the years with the budget cuts. You used to have guys that were out in the state pen that were learning job skills that they could get out and apply, carpentry, all sorts of different things and stuff. And that's really changed over time. I know that the University of Nebraska, they have out in Curtis, they have that campus, and there's been some interest there with the person who runs that about working with McCook with the work ethic camp, and having guys there come out over and get trained to learn to do different things on farms and ranches and things like that. So there's been a lot of discussion out there. I don't think anything's happened yet, but at least there's been some of that discussion. When you talk about dogs, they do have a lot of the dog programs now in the different prisons and stuff, where they learn to handle dogs and train dogs, and then they can become service dogs or just pets for people on the way out. And they do really. I was at a meeting at the Lincoln Correctional Center with inmates the other day, and one of the guys brought in the dog that he's working with, and it does really calm people down, and it kind of sets a tone in the room, it's very interesting to see that. So it's kind of a cool program. There's a lot of different things that Director Frakes is a pretty innovative guy, and he was from the state of Washington. If you look at the state of Washington, they do a lot of different things out there. I think his problem has been that he's come into a system that is so overcrowded and in such turmoil, it's hard to do some of those innovative things. We do have a new warden from Ohio that's running the Lincoln Correctional Center, and he has some really bold ideas on getting more work opportunities for inmates and saving money too, even with like recycling and garbage and different things. It's pretty interesting. So getting some new blood, new ideas into the system, I think is a real positive.
Doug, I remember when you did this presentation 2 years ago, one of the surprises I think for the candidates was how low the pay is within the system and how that contributes to staff overcrowding or staff not having enough staff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The pay has actually increased over the last few years. I mean, if you were a correctional officer starting out a couple of years ago, you were probably around $15 an hour. And you don't have to be like 18, 19-year-old kid, like I've got an 18-year-old daughter. She could apply right now and probably get hired to go work out at the state pen. I don't know that she wants to do that, but a few years ago, that was like $15. They've kind of changed some of the way that they pay people. Instead of hiring them as correctional officers, they go ahead and hire them as corporals, which is the next step. And so the start, at least some of the facilities, and that starting pay right now is at $18.16 an hour. So if you're a 19, 20, 21-year-old person and you want to be a prison guard, that's not a bad wage. If you look at some of the states around us, like Kansas, they're like 12, 13 bucks an hour. So that's not bad. One of the big problems that the staff say, like in my survey, when I hear them, when I go out and visit with them, is that they don't have a step plan. So let's say I'm a corporal and I've been working there for 10 years. I'll be making the same amount as the corporal who just started. So there's no, like they say, there's no incentive. I can leave and I can come back and I'll start at where I was when I left and everything. So that's one of the issues that Director Frakes has actually identified over the last year or so that he would like to work on. But the pay is better. And then when you look at the mental health pay, like psychiatrists and psychologists and the doctors, stuff like that, that's pretty good. The nursing pay is probably not where it needs to be. They actually pay better at the regional center than they do for the state prison system. But that's I have a good friend that was a nurse at the state pen for a while, and they were getting so stressed out. They would drive up there and like, whoa, I don't know if I can go in today because of the safety concerns. But then they have such a high demand on them too, as for what they have to provide. So it can be a very challenging position all across the board.
Quick question. I know in Jefferson County, our jail is only 14 beds, and he is traditionally at 17. We have overcrowding. He's telling me we have overcrowding in our county jail systems, as do the other 3 sheriffs, because of their overcrowding. It's just, like he said, it constipates the whole system. And last week, we lost an inmate. But that reason was, it has yet to come out. Do you know, you got 5,300 in the state system today. Do you know what the total number is for the entire state, including the county jails?
County jails, I don't know that off the top of my head, but I know it's increased, and part of it is when the legislature passed LB 605, that was gonna, fewer people were gonna be coming into the state system because the fear of the counties then were that more people would stay for longer periods of time in their county jail system, and for the most part, it seems like that has played out. So you do see a county jail system that is more overcrowded than it was a few years ago as well. We do have about 100 guys right now that are state inmates that are housed in county jails. But with the county jail population going up, and then also the federal government coming in and doing a lot of contracts for the ICE contracts, a lot of jails are using their extra beds for those federal prisoners, older men, or detainees. And so, yeah, it has impacted the county jail system as well. Yeah, that's it.
Doug, you're fairly closest. What's your position on some for-profits that come in and run prisons? I know there's some of that in Ohio.
I'd be, based on my research, I'd be 100% against that.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of documented cases out there with really bad things that happen in those systems.
I just Just
Yeah, I mean, that's from what I've read and seen and everything, it is allowed under the law in Nebraska. There was a bill that allowed that. But we've never had a Department of Corrections director advocate for that in the 20 years that I've been around.
The learning curve from the young person being brought up to STEAM to be a guard is not immediate. Has there been any effort or any thought given to reaching out to veterans who already trained in those areas to take those jobs and maybe somehow or another enhance their, if they're not eligible for military retirement, to make them more eligible for a retirement program?
Actually, there have been military veterans that have come into the system recently as in different positions in the department. The human resources part of the Department of Corrections has reached out to people like that. I do know that that's one of their strategies. And I've talked to several guys that, were in the service for maybe 20 years and now they're working in the system. So yeah, that's something that's worked pretty well so far, I think. But that's, one of the things that they're trying to do is reach out to everyone and anyone and think of all sorts of different strategies. And the good thing is there's lots of examples around the country of ways that you can attract people or different populations you can kind of aim at to see if you can get them. One of the things I suggested to them was you advertise in the prison or near the prisons in northern Kansas and kind of northwest Missouri, because their pay is so much lower than ours really for that entry level position. We might be able to pull some people who are actually prison staff members in Kansas or Missouri, and they might move up here for another $3 or $4 an hour. So, and I think they maybe have started doing that a little bit. But one of the challenges that they do have is that like Lancaster County, Douglas County, Sarpy County, and some other counties pay more than the state system. So they've lost people, and Sarpy County just hired a bunch of new staff. They kind of stole from not only the state system, but also from Douglas County, and then Douglas County then grabbed from the state system and everything. So even at York County, you're going to get paid more working in the York County jail than at the women's prison in York.
You touched on it a little earlier on health issues, but what is the reason that do you have any statistics on, is it drugs that are, why are there so many in prison?
Oh,
drugs,
yeah, drugs is
combination.
huge. Drugs is, that's what I hear from people within the department and people on the front end and parole, probation and everything. And you just look at the mug shots that are posted on like the Journal Star or wherever. Yeah, drugs are huge. And I talk to so many men and women in the system that are in because of drugs. And it might not be a crime directly, a drug crime, though there, if you look at the, if we have that here, like the most serious offense on the front of this quarterly data sheet, the most serious offense for the reason you're in, over 1,000, so almost 20% are sex offenses. The drugs were second at almost 13%, about 687. But you look at a lot of these other things in here with robbery or burglary or theft, things like that, there's a lot of connection to drugs with those. And so you see a lot of guys, I hear it from a lot of guys that they are recommended for substance abuse treatment. When they come into the system, they're like, I'm not in for a drug charge. I'm not in for a drug charge. Well, not technically, but you are in there because of drugs and everything. And they've done assessments and they do recommend that you need substance abuse treatment. Yes.
I have another question. I'd like your opinion on. I had a sheriff come to me and he wanted legislation that would require or make it a felony for anyone that delivers contraband, either into a state or county jail or to the state prison, whether it was if it was a corrections officer or if it's a family member, it's a felony count. So it makes it much more serious about getting drugs into or any other contraband into this. I want your opinion.
I don't know what the penalty is exactly right now, but one of the big things that I've stressed during my time in this position to the department is that when you do catch somebody, let's prosecute them. Like for the longest time, a lot of people were introducing things into the system, like a lot of staff, and they just walk them out, and they didn't do anything. there was no message being sent to other staff like, hey, you can't do this. You're gonna, I mean, okay, you're gonna lose your job, but there's no other penalty and everything. So I'd have to look at that a little more closely. But I mean, that one of the things I would say that Director Franks has done is that they are starting to turn those cases over to the county attorney and the state patrol and everything. We have so many cell phones that get smuggled in, and the drugs that get smuggled in. There's K2 and marijuana, and oh my God, I mean, there's so much that gets brought into the prison system. I had no idea. And then people make illegal alcohol in their cells and stuff. And you have times where guys are caught with like, I think the largest one I've heard is they were caught with like 60 gallons in their cell of hooch, of illegal alcohol. And stuff.
How would you hide
And
it?
everything. And I don't know how you don't go blind thinking that stuff, but so there's a lot of contraband being brought in. The illegal hooch, that's more of things that they can find and get really creative, but there's so much K2 and marijuana being brought in, and the cell phones too. Yes, sir.
Is there any thought been given to, in order to reduce the population in the prisons, to doing something similar that sex offenders have to do? Is every time they buy a car, as I understand it, they can't even drive other cars. There's many regulations that they have to follow in order to keep from going back to prison. They have to register where they live. And as far as people that are nonviolent criminals, would that be something that could be looked at to get some people out and?
Yeah, kind of get creative on the back end and everything. I'm not sure if anything like that's been looked at, but there are the parole administration has been trying to do a lot of new things, or really trying to think outside the box. We have a new director of parole administration, and she's pretty creative. I'll have to ask her about that.
Because I understand it. I mean, registered sex offender.
Yeah, they have to do a lot of
They have to do a lot, and yet somebody that's been in prison for maybe even second-degree murder gets released. And no, as far as I know, maybe they're on probation for a while, but once they even get off probation, these sex offenders are that way for life.
They can be 15 years or to life and everything, or other people, they're once their parole's up, they can disappear and everything.
So to me, that's something I've thought about. Maybe we could get some people out of the prisons using a system like that, if it's working for the sex offenders, and keeping track of them.
I'll have to check on that. A couple of things that I think on the back end of the system that could be helpful. One is to expand the number of reentry programs that they have with these community groups and stuff that are going on across the state. There's some really good stuff that are going on. And then and that's the Department of Corrections saying that too, because they've had great success. If you can keep people out of trouble really for like the first 72 hours to 2 weeks when they get out, the chances of them staying out of trouble are much greater, which is a positive. And then the other thing is, there's been some states that have created more of a system where on the back end, instead of having the Department of Corrections running community corrections, you have more parole reentry. So you're having a different set of eyes and a different viewpoint as far as easing their transition out and trying to get them back in the community with as the fewer problems, but more wraparound kind of programming and treatment and things like that. So there's been some talk about that. I think there's going to be some pretty interesting things brought up in 2019.
Do you have a statistic on how many actually returned or released?
It's about 34% is what and that's pretty good for Nebraska, or for across the state. That's pretty good.
All right, well, thank